Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. So when I first heard it, my immediate reaction was like, okay, is this real? Is this hype? Is this Dana just throwing numbers out there to build the buzz? Because we've seen that before. But from everything I'm hearing, this is legit. This is Dana White saying Khamzat is at that level. Now let's unpack what that means. First of all, for the UFC to even entertain that number, it means they believe this guy is a generational star. You don't drop 30 million unless you think the pay-per-view revenue, the gate, the global impact, all of that is going to cover it and then some. So Dana and the UFC, they're looking at Khamzat and saying this guy's not just a top contender, this guy's the future. And honestly, it makes sense. I've been cage side for this man's fights. I've called his fights. And I can tell you the energy shifts the second he walks out. There's only a few fighters in history who've had that kind of presence. When Khamzat comes in, it's like everybody's on edge. The crowd roars differently. There's this tension because people expect violence, they expect destruction. And in the fight business, that's the product, that's what sells. Let's go back a little bit, because I think it's important to remember how fast this all happened. Khamzat debuted in the UFC in 2020 on Fight Island. He fights John Phillips, destroys him, chokes him out. And then this is where people's jaws dropped. 10 days later, he's back inside the octagon fighting Rhys McKee. 10 days. Who does that? Who fights twice in 10 days, takes 0 damage, and looks fresh like it's a sparring session? He smashes McKee, total domination. Right there, you knew this guy was different. And then when he picked up Li Jingliang, carried him across the cage while talking to Dana White, that was like a movie. That was one of those moments you'll replay forever because it's so absurd. This is a ranked welterweight, a legitimate killer, and Khamzat is manhandling him like he's a kid. That was the birth of the Khamzat hype train. Fast forward to Gilbert Burns. That was the real test. People said, okay, Khamzat has been fighting good opponents, but can he hang with the elite? And Burns brought it. Burns cracked him. Burns made him bleed. Burns forced him into a war. But Khamzat didn't back down. He kept swinging, kept pressing, and he won. That fight told us everything. He's not just a bully. He's got the chin. He's got the gas tank. He's got the gas tank. He's got the heart. That's when I knew this guy isn't just hype, he's for real. So now here we are a few years later, and Dana's putting 30 million on the table. Let me explain why this isn't crazy. In boxing, you've got these huge purses, 50 million, 100 million, whatever. But MMA has always been different. Fighters usually make way less because the UFC model is structured differently. But every once in a while, you get a fight so big, so massive, that it forces the UFC to go all in. Conor versus Khabib, that's an example. That fight broke records. McGregor versus Diaz, massive numbers. Conor versus Floyd, even though that was boxing, that was astronomical. Khamzat is in that zone now. He's the guy that casual fans know, hardcore fans respect, and fighters fear. And that's a rare combination. Normally you have one or two of those elements. You're either loved by casuals because you talk a lot, or you're respected by hardcores because you're technically brilliant. Khamzat has both, plus fear. Fighters don't want to fight him, man. That tells you everything. Now let's talk about opponents, because that's the real key. Who's worth 30 million against Khamzat? You don't just pay him that to fight a random top 10 guy. No, this is super fight territory. You're talking about Khamzat versus Usman, Khamzat versus Adesanya, Khamzat versus Strickland, Khamzat versus Pereira. Hell, even a Jon Jones crossover someday. Those are the kinds of names that justify. If it's Usman, that's a legacy fight. Usman is one of the greatest welterweights ever, and stylistically it's fascinating. If it's Adesanya, that's striker versus grappler, art versus chaos. If it's Pereira, Jesus, that's nuclear violence. And if it's Jones, that's a mega crossover. That's the UFC saying we're making history. The UFC knows all this. Dana's not stupid. He's not throwing 30 million for fun. He's investing. He sees Khamzat as the guy who can headline stadiums, who can do international pay-per-view numbers, who can be marketed globally. That's why this offer is out there. People forget too, the UFC has big plans in Saudi Arabia, Abu Dhabi, the Middle East. Khamzat is a huge star there. You put him in a stadium in Saudi Arabia with oil money backing it, with the government investing in sports entertainment. You're selling out 60,000 seats in minutes, and that's where the 30 million comes from. It's not just domestic UFC business. It's global expansion. It's geopolitics. It's entertainment. And think about this. The UFC is very strategic. They don't just build anyone. They pick their stars carefully. And right now the roster has some great fighters, but not many superstars. Jon Jones is near the end. Conor's unpredictable. Izzy's still a star, but he's lost some shine. They need a new face. And Khamzat is right there. He's undefeated. He's terrifying. He's marketable. He's got that aura. That's why they're betting big. From my perspective, this is a turning point in MMA. Because if Khamzat pulls this off, if he gets this 30 million fight and wins, he becomes the new king. He becomes the guy. And every fighter who wants that payday, they're going to line up to fight him. That's how you build an era. That's how you get the Khamzat era. So let's start with Kamaru Usman. Usman is one of the greatest welterweights ever. He's strong, disciplined, tactical, and he's got cardio for days. People thought he was unbeatable for a long stretch. If you put Usman in there with Khamzat, that's a true clash of styles. Usman's takedown defense is elite. He's not a guy who gets ragdolled easily. If Khamzat can take him down and dominate, that's the kind of fight that proves to the world this man isn't just hype. He's a generational fighter. Then you've got Israel Adesanya. That's the stylistic dream fight, man. Izzy is like an artist in there. He paints with punches and kicks. His distance management, his timing, his calmness, it's beautiful to watch. But Khamzat brings chaos. He's like a storm. He doesn't respect distance. He doesn't respect rhythm. He just bullies forward, grabs you, and drags you into deep water. That's why people would tune in worldwide, because nobody knows if Izzy can survive that pressure or if Khamzat can handle the sniper-like striking coming back at him. That's an unpredictable equation. And then Alex Pereira. Oh my God, that would be nuclear. Pereira is one of the hardest punchers in combat sports history. His left hook is like a sledgehammer. If Khamzat charges recklessly and gets caught, lights out. But if he gets his hands on Pereira and puts him on his back, total mauling. That's the definition of a fight where everyone is holding their breath every second, because at any moment something spectacular can happen. Now, the wild card, Jon Jones. People will say, come on, Rogan, that's crazy. But look, crazy is what makes money. Nobody thought we'd see Conor McGregor in a boxing ring with Floyd Mayweather. Nobody thought Brock Lesnar would become a UFC champion. This sport thrives on the unexpected. Jones versus Khamzat would be one of those crossover fights that breaks every record. It's the kind of fight people would pay just to imagine. And this is where the UFC's business brain comes in, because Dana knows he's not just selling a fight, he's selling an era. Khamzat is young, he's undefeated, and he's got that aura. If you build him right, he can carry the company for the next decade. That's what this 30 million is about. It's not just compensation, it's investment. It's saying we're putting the crown on this guy. Let's talk about geography too, because that's a huge factor. The UFC is expanding aggressively into the Middle East. They've already got Abu Dhabi locked in. And Saudi Arabia is making big moves in sports. They've thrown money at boxing, at soccer, at golf. Now they want MMA. Who better to headline that than Khamzat? He's got roots in that region. He's a hero to a lot of people there, and he brings that kind of aura that fills stadiums. You put him in Riyadh or Jeddah, you'll sell out 60,000 seats and do monster pay-per-view numbers on top of that. That's where the 30 million makes total sense. And it's not just the live gate. It's sponsorships, it's broadcast rights, it's global expansion. Khamzat isn't just fighting for himself, he's the vehicle the UFC can use to plant their flag in new markets, and that's priceless. That's why Dana's all in. Now, let's compare to history. Think about the biggest UFC paydays. Conor McGregor was the first to crack into boxing level money because he brought eyeballs like nobody else. Khabib made big money off the Conor fight because the rivalry was so intense. Ronda Rousey was massive. She opened doors. Brock Lesnar was a freak show that worked. But Khamzat is different. He's not just hype. He's not just a crossover star. He's a legitimate destroyer with mainstream appeal. That combination is ultra rare. Another thing that sets him apart is fear. Fighters are scared of him. You can see it in the body language. When he fought Li Jingliang, Li looked overwhelmed before the first takedown even landed. When fighters talk about him, you can hear the hesitation. That fear factor sells. That's why Mike Tyson was the biggest draw in the world. People tuned in to see destruction. That's Khamzat's vibe. The UFC needs that right now. Think about it. Jon Jones is incredible, but he's been inactive for years. Conor is unpredictable. Adesanya is still a star, but he's been beaten. They need someone fresh, someone dangerous, someone who feels like the future. That's why this deal is happening. And if Khamzat wins, If he gets that $30 million fight and he wins in dominant fashion, he becomes the guy. He becomes the new face of the UFC. Every fight he has after that will be an event. Every opponent will see dollar signs. That's how eras are built. That's how you go from fighter to superstar. From a technical standpoint, what makes Khamzat so dangerous is the combination. His wrestling is world class. He doesn't just take you down, he humiliates you. He drags you around like a rag doll, talks to Dana while he's smashing you. That's dominance. And then on the feet, he's not polished like Adesanya, but he's wild, powerful, and fearless. That's scary because he's willing to eat a shot to land one, and most guys don't want to test that. The Burns fight showed the holes. He's hittable. He can get cracked. But it also showed his durability, his willpower, and his refusal to break. That's why the hype didn't die after that fight. It grew because fans saw he's not just a bully, he's got the dog in him. So here's where I stand. 30 million for Khamzat isn't insane. It's the future. It's the UFC recognizing that this guy can take them to the next level globally. It's the UFC betting that Khamzat is the next Tyson, the next Conor, the next Khabib, all rolled into one. And honestly, I believe it. I've seen them all. I've called them all, and I can tell you right now, Khamzat is different. He's got that thing you can't teach. He's got that presence, that aura, that danger. That's why the UFC is paying him like this. That's why Dana White dropped that number. We're entering the Khamzat era. Mark my words.